From Warsaw, the National Assembly of Poland today elected Marshal Piłsudski President of the Republic, and the Marshal has refused the office. The chair he fought a war in the streets to control, he declines to sit in. The Assembly must now vote again. From London, the last terms on the table in Britain's Coal War expire tonight. The leaders of the miners and the leaders of the owners were both in the capital this day, and the Prime Minister waited upon them, and no man among them put a proposal forward. At midnight, the government's offer of £3 million lapses untouched, and the pits stay shut. From Lisbon, the Republic's Parliament has been closed by cavalry, and the President of Portugal has resigned by letter. A ministry of the rising's making holds the capital, while the general who began the revolt still advances upon it. And from Philadelphia, the Republic of the United States opened this Memorial Day its great exposition for the 150th year of the Declaration of Independence, under heavy rain. This is Tribune of the Plebs, the news of the day given whole. Monday, the 31st of May, 1926. The day's foremost news is from Warsaw, and it is a thing that has not happened in the short history of the Polish Republic. A man elected to its presidency has turned the office down. The National Assembly, the two houses sitting together, the same body whose government the Marshal broke 3 weeks ago with rifle fire on the Vistula bridges, today chose Józef Piłsudski as President of the Republic. The count ran 292 votes for the Marshal against 193 for the candidate of the right, with better than 50 ballots returned blank, a silent protest no count can read precisely. It was, on its face, the Parliament's surrender, offered in constitutional form, the office tendered to the man whose soldiers had lately held the capital against its government. And he declined it, by letter to the chair of the Assembly, thanking it for the honor it had done him and refusing the honor itself. The delegation that carried him the news of his election carried his answer back. His reasons are no secret, for he has given them for years, and they are not modest ones. The presidency of Poland, as the Constitution of 1921 built it, is a ceremonial chair. The Constitution was written in the shadow of the partitions and of one strong man's possible return, precisely to keep any single hand from the levers. Piłsudski gave the order it created his own name of contempt, a samocracy, government by Parliament and by nothing else. And it was over that Constitution's limits that he withdrew from public life 4 years ago. Today's refusal is the same argument made from the other side of a victory. He will not take the title without the power, and the title is all the Constitution offers. So he has done the rarer thing in politics, declined the promotion that would have demoted him. The office he declines has its own short, dark history. The Republic's first elected president took his oath in December of 1922 and was shot dead within the week in a Warsaw gallery by a nationalist who held him the wrong man for Poland. His successor is the man Piłsudski faced down upon the Poniatowski Bridge 3 weeks ago. 2 presidents, one murdered, one broken by the army. A third must now be found, for the Assembly, having offered the highest office in the state to the man who conquered it, must find a candidate who will accept. And the Marshal keeps what he held this morning, the War Ministry in Mr. Bartel's cabinet, the Army's obedience, and no office a Constitution could circumscribe. And the men who made his victory may study the refusal with particular care. It was the socialists and the railway workers who tipped the May fighting his way. Their own paper admitted in the same week that he had promised them nothing concrete. Tonight he has declined the one office that answers to electors. A president must face the Assembly. A marshal with the War Ministry faces no one. The labor movement of Poland backed a man 3 weeks ago. It learns tonight, with the rest of the country, that it did not thereby back a program. The arithmetic of May in Poland thus closes where it began, with the question of where power actually lives. On the 4th of this month, it lived, formally, in a parliament that could not hold a government together. Tonight, it lives, visibly, in one man who has declined to give it a constitutional name. We will report the Assembly's next vote when it comes. From Britain, the Cold War reaches a deadline tonight, and it passes with nothing done. The shape of it is this. Last summer, to buy peace, the government granted the coal trade a subsidy, public money laid down for 9 months to hold the miners' wages up while a commission studied the industry. That commission, reporting in the spring, allowed that the mines wanted reorganizing, but allowed in the same breath that wages might be cut once the subsidy lapsed. And it is on that second word, and not the first, that the owners have built the terms now before the men. The subsidy ran out at the start of this month. The owners answered its ending with the terms that closed the pits, and the lockout has held ever since. What remained on the table was a last smaller offer, £3 million, set down by the government as a bridge over which a settlement might be carried, and good only to the end of May. The end of May is tonight. This day, the principal men of both sides were in London, the executive of the Miners' Federation, the leaders of the Mining Association, and the Prime Minister, Mr. Baldwin, waited at Downing Street to receive a proposal from either of them. None came. The owners stood on their terms. The men stood on theirs. The hours ran down, and the government's £3 million, never claimed, lapses at midnight. The one device that might have kept the field from foundering while the quarrel was argued out expires unused, not refused in a vote, but simply allowed to run out like a clock no one wound. So the lockout passes its first full month with the gap between the two sides exactly as wide as on the first morning. The miners tonight complete 4 full weeks shut out, the last 3 of them alone, since the general strike was called off over their heads. And their answer to the owners' terms is what it was on the first day. Men with long memories in the coal fields know the shape of the season ahead, for they have lived it. 5 years ago, in the lockout of 1921, the same owners closed the same pits on the same kind of terms, and after 3 months of hunger, the men went back beaten. That is the model the owners are working from. It is why they are in no hurry, and why a deadline passing changes nothing for them. And the miners know the model as well as the owners do, and are out regardless. Whether 1926 runs by the old pattern or breaks it is precisely what the next months exist to decide. What keeps the men out, with the subsidy gone, is not a speech, but a chain of bread. From Moscow, by the latest dispatches, the trade unions of the Soviet Union report the solidarity collections organized for the miners' relief across that country. Union treasuries and shop floor subscriptions alike. We reported the Communist International's appeal last week. The collections now reported are the same solidarity at work. The money crosses Europe to the coal fields. The relief keeps the families fed. The families keep the men out. With the government's offer dead on the table tonight, that chain, and not any device of Downing Street, is what a 5th week will be made of. In Portugal, the rising we reported on Friday has all but finished its work. Through the weekend, the movement spread. The Prime Minister resigned on Saturday, and the Lisbon garrison went over to the rising. On Sunday, President Machado called upon Captain Mendes Cabeçadas, a naval officer whose name stood on the first day's manifesto, to head a new ministry, the portfolios gathered for the moment into his single pair of hands. The crowds in Lisbon are reported cheering the old order's fall. The rising has not had to fight for the capital at all. But the seams in the movement showed almost at once. Naval men in possession of the Ministry of Marine let it be known on Saturday that they would not stand behind a purely militarist government. Sailors serving notice on the generals before the victory was a day old, and still General Gomes da Costa's columns kept advancing on the capital, the political settlement in Lisbon notwithstanding, which says the rising's separate heads have not yet agreed whose rising it is. Today, the end came in 2 documents and 1 order of cavalry. The Chamber and the Senate attempted to sit and could not raise a quorum. In the afternoon, a squadron of Republican Guard cavalry closed the Congress building outright, and President Machado resigned by letter from outside the Capitol, writing that with order restored and a national ministry formed, his task was done. By the Constitution's logic, his functions pass for now to the ministry itself. Portugal tonight has no parliament in session, no president, and a government whose authority rests on the army that made it. while the general who lit the fuse at Braga has yet to reach Lisbon, and no one can say with confidence what happens when he does. This is the Republic whose 16 years of churn we set out 3 nights ago, a parliament so worn by its own instability that by the accounts now reaching us, the crowds greeted its silencing with relief rather than grief. A parliament that cannot govern is not mourned when soldiers close its doors. Whether what replaces it governs any better is a question the cavalry at the Congress did not answer. 3 days ago, we asked whether the Portuguese Republic would stand. The buildings stand. From North Africa, a closing note on a war this broadcast has followed to its end. We reported in the past days the surrender of Abd-el-Krim, the leader of the RIF, the man who some years ago shattered a Spanish army and built himself into the very name of resistance in the mountains, brought at last within the French lines, and his rebellion finished. Tonight the dispatches carry not the fact of the surrender, but the management of it. The French resident general and the Sultan of Morocco, it is reported, are arranging the formal act of submission with great care. Care, above all, to drain it of drama. There is to be no spectacle, no ceremony grand enough to make a martyr or a legend of the defeated man. He is to be moved quietly, treated with a measured clemency, and folded out of sight. His defeat had required not one empire, but 2. France and Spain had quarreled over these mountains for years, and the RIF held out so long, in part because its enemies were divided. The rebellion was broken only when the 2 powers stopped quarreling and turned their joined armies against it. There is a sign in that caution. A beaten man is not usually handled so gingerly. The very pains the victors take to deny Abd-el-Krim a stage are a confession of how much symbolic power he still holds even in defeat, that his name, spoken in the right place, could still move the mountains and the tribes beyond them. Empires take care over the aftermaths of their wars, knowing which images travel. France has won the field. What it cannot quite win is the meaning of the picture, and so it has decided there will be no picture at all. In the United States, this Memorial Day, the Republic kept 2 civic occasions at once. The first was the older one. Across the country, the day was given to the war dead. The cemeteries visited, the addresses delivered, the graves of the men who did not come home from France marked again with flowers and with flags. 8 years have passed since the guns of that war fell silent. The men who fought it are still young, and the day that honors the ones who did not return is among the most firmly kept on the American calendar. The day itself is older than that war. It was born after the great Civil War of the last century, when the country first set apart a date to dress the graves of its own dead. But it is the men of the European War whose graves are freshest and whose mothers are still living. The Great War has not receded into history. It sits, on a day like this one, close beneath the surface of public life. The second occasion was newer and louder. At Philadelphia, on grounds laid out in the south of the city by the Navy Yard, the Sesquicentennial Exposition opened its gates, the great fair for the 150th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. Philadelphia has done this before. 50 years ago, its centennial exhibition drew the world and is remembered still, and the city means the sesquicentennial for a second such triumph. The opening day was not obliging. The Secretary of State and the Secretary of Commerce spoke for the administration, and the crowds came, and a hard, steady rain thinned them before the speeches were done. At night, the fair's centerpiece was lit all the same. A Liberty Bell built of 26,000 electric lamps raised above the entrance, blowing over South Philadelphia in the wet. There is a particular American genius in this, to take a founding document and build it a fairground, to remember a revolution with turnstiles, pavilions, and a bell that is not bronze, but current, switched on at dusk. The fair will run all summer, and the speeches will run with it. The words of the document being celebrated are a matter of record, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed with rights no power may take from them. The year of news this broadcast has carried stands in the record beside them. The bell of lamps burned over the city tonight through the rain. And from Indiana, the day's other American gathering, held like the fair in the rain, and drawing a crowd that no monument needed to summon. At Indianapolis this Memorial Day, the great motor race was run, the contest they call the 500, and something near 135,000 people came out to the brick oval to watch it. The winner is a young man named Frank Lockhart, a newcomer to the race who had never started it before today, and who began the day 20th in the line of cars. By the fifth lap, he had passed 14 of the men ahead of him. Before long, he was running at the front, and he stayed there. The rain that fell on Philadelphia fell here, too, and harder in its consequence. It stopped the race once and washed it out for good at 400 of the 500 miles, so that the contest was called, and the young man declared the winner with 100 miles never run. It is the first time the great race has been ended by weather. Note what 135,000 people came to see. A generation ago, the heroes of a crowd that size were soldiers and statesmen. This afternoon, they were a driver and an engine. The machine age furnishing its own champions, men celebrated for mastering, at better than 90 miles an hour, a contraption that did not exist when their grandfathers were boys. The automobile has remade the country's roads, its work, and its map. Today, in the rain at Indianapolis, it stood revealed as a maker of fame as well. The young man's name was unknown this morning. It will be in every sporting page in America tomorrow. A note now from the courts of the American South, where an argument that filled the front pages last summer has quietly moved upstairs. Listeners may recall the trial at Dayton in Tennessee, where a young schoolteacher was tried and convicted last July for teaching his pupils that mankind had descended from a lower order of animals, a thing forbidden by a law of that state passed in 1925, which holds that the schools may not teach any account of man's origin contrary to the one set down in Scripture. The trial drew the nation's most famous lawyers and the nation's whole attention. The great orator who argued for the prosecution died within days of its close, his last great cause being this one. The teacher was found guilty and fined $100. But a verdict was never the end of it, and both sides always meant to carry the question higher. Today, the state of Tennessee filed its brief in the appeal, laying its argument before the Supreme Court of the state, which will decide whether the conviction and the law beneath it shall stand. And so the quarrel of Dayton is argued again, this time not before a country crowd in a sweltering courthouse, but in the cool language of a written brief and a court of appeal. The matter has not changed for the rising, whether a state may tell its teachers what may be taught of where men come from, whether the new findings of science or the old certainties of faith shall have the schoolroom, and whether such a question belongs to a legislature, a court, or no government at all. The lawyers have changed their venue. The argument is the same one, and it is not finished. One late dispatch printed in this evening's papers by way of Rangoon, and it is grave. A disastrous storm struck the coast of Arakan in British Burma some days ago. The dispatches say the sea itself was driven inland over the low country along the coastal ranges, and that villages there are gone entire. The first accounts put the dead at 1,200 and say plainly that the counting has barely begun. The storm is days old. The news of it is tonight's. And so the month closes. Look back over it from where tonight stands. The strike that stopped an empire for 9 days. The coup that took Warsaw in 3. The bombardments over Damascus. A republic proclaimed in Lebanon. A republic extinguished in the Rif. A republic falling in Portugal. A hearing compelled from the Senate of the United States. A marshal who declined a crown rather than wear it without power. And through all of it, the miners and the mill hands holding their lines while the relief crossed Europe to keep them fed. Tonight, a deadline passes in London with nothing settled. A fair opens in the Philadelphia wet. A young man wins a race in Indiana. And word reaches us of a far coast laid waste by the sea. The summer now begins. and we will report it day by day. That has been the full report of the day. This is Tribune of the Plebs, signing off for the night.